Let's bring in Carl Rossender. He's Chief Executive of Nordic Air Defence, a defence startup from Sweden, of course NATO's newest member. Carl, very good morning to you. Just first of all, your impression of what's happening here in Brussels. Siobhan Robbins, our correspondent, was calling it a watershed moment, or quoting Ursula von der Leyen in saying that. Do you feel that Europe is now starting to take its defence seriously?
I mean, they're starting to take it seriously, but from a defense tech company side, like Nordic Air Defence, we need to see a rapid deregulation and also less bureaucracy. And also governments in Europe needs to start working with defense tech startup, not only with the defense, traditional defense industry players. And this is where defense tech companies come in for Europe. With inexpensive and scalable technologies. We really need a deregulation get this going.
Yeah, and Cole, what are Europe's defence capabilities like at the moment? We know it's not been properly funded for quite a long time, but what does it look like in Sweden and indeed elsewhere?
I mean, Sweden has covering 5% of the Swedish surface with air defense and basically only military infrastructure. So we are not prepared. We're not prepared for the new threat, which is the drones. We basically have no defense for that, which is, of course, really, really bad. Drones is becoming autonomous, so it's hard to jam them. And I mean, we have to have solutions for the drone threat, like Nordic Air Defence have.
And Europe can learn things from Ukraine, can't it? I was talking to someone the other day who suggested actually the most advanced military force in Europe these days in many ways is Ukraine, given the fact they've been fighting the Russians for more than a decade now. Is that your sense? Because I know you talked about drones and they've done quite well recently with drone technology, the Ukrainians.
Yeah, they do. They're in the forefront, of course. They have to move fast and change. If you look, I look at the daily reports that shows that in the drone war in Ukraine, that one day in Ukraine shows 90% of expensive systems and also humans' lives get destroyed by those cheap drones.
And just what would you like the leaders to do beyond committing money today or indeed tomorrow? The summit's over 2 days. We're almost certainly going to see a lot of extra investment, aren't we, in defence, whether it's at the national level or indeed at an EU-wide level. But what do you think that money should be used for?
I mean, big expensive systems are good, of course, cost taxpayers a lot. Cheaper technologies, it's more scalable technologies. But I must say, at this stage, a deregulation with less bureaucracy from the European governments would be easing up a lot, because companies like Nordic Air Defence, they get stuck on the regulations, which is the money is here, but the regulations
need to change.
Yes.
Okay.
Rapidly.
Okay, well, we will keep across that. Carl, really appreciate your time this morning there, live from Stockholm. Carl Rossender, thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Now, let's move away from defence and indeed that summit in Brussels and talk about Vauxhall, because it's called for urgent action on the lack of street charges for electric vehicles today, saying that it's the main barrier to almost a quarter of companies that are switching to all electric fleets. With the sale of new petrol and diesel vehicles due to be banned by 2035, Vauxhall is calling on local councils to prioritise the installation of charge points on residential roads that need them most. Well, let's speak to Ulrik Druus. He is Group Managing Director of Stellantis UK. That is the parent company, of course, of Vauxhall. Very good morning to you there in Coventry. So your criticism here is that there still simply aren't enough EV chargers up and down the country that are accessible for lots of people.
Yeah, less of more the criticism, but more a constructive way of working to try and improve the position for our customers and potential customers for the future. We launched today, of course, the electric van adoption report, and what that has done is to speak to a number of business customers that we currently have and others that we don't have, to investigate what would hold them back in terms of moving their fleet of vehicles onto the electric vehicles of the future. And 91% of the fleet operators say that their drivers, if they were to transition their full vehicle range to electric, would need on-street charging. And that's what we're trying to campaign as Vauxhall to try and improve that position.
In saying that, I mean, you did manage to meet the electric vehicle target last year, and that's with the current infrastructure. So, many would suggest that actually, clearly, up until now, things have been working.
Yeah, indeed, Stellantis and Vauxhall specifically met the SAV mandate requirement for last year. Remember, the SAV mandate takes us from 22% cars and 10% vans last year towards 80% electric mix in 2030. So we have a significant ramp up to achieve. And to do that, then we need to make it easy for consumers. And that's what the Electric Streets campaign is all about. It gives consumers the opportunity today to tell us through our website, electricstreets.co.uk, where having an on-street charger would be advantageous for them and would help them to make the transition. And we have already 12,000 streets that have been registered, and now we'll work closely with local councils, with government, to try and prioritise where the charging infrastructure is placed.
My impression, though, of people I know who own electric cars is the criticism may be in part that there's just not enough chargers, but more importantly that the battery itself just doesn't last as long as they would like it to. And isn't then the onus actually not on councils to have more EV chargers? It's for you guys to come up with better batteries.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge, of course, that we would take, but I've already delivered on. So today, Stellantis has 30 electric vehicles on sale. Will be 40 by the end of this year. All of the Vauxhall range of vehicles is now available as electric, with ranges of up to over 400 miles. And I think in the majority of consumers' circumstances, that kind of range is absolutely sufficient for the typical mileage that they do. Now what we need is to compel more demand for those vehicles, and a part of that comes from improving the infrastructure of charging. 40% of homes in the UK don't have a driveway, and so those people are dependent on public charging, and in particular will be dependent on street parking. And we want a campaign to make that part of the process easier, and then, of course, rely on the government to support the demand curve in terms of these vehicles.
Just finally on this, you closed or are closing down your Luton van plants because of, in part, these electric vehicle targets that you seem to be able to meet. I don't know how to square that circle. What's going on here? If you can meet these targets, why are you still continuing to criticise them?
So we're not criticising, we're actually absolutely on board with the government on making this transition. What we are placing ourselves in today, and we're trying to work closely with the government, is to make sure that we achieve the transition. When you look at the transition that we're trying to do together, we're looking to absolutely change how the UK public go about moving on a day-to-day basis, away from petrol, diesel into electric. That is a significant change. And to do that, and to ramp up in terms of BEV mix, the electric vehicle mix that we want for meeting those targets, we'll need a ramp up very, very quickly. And that requires us to bring the right products to market, the government and local councils and private companies to support the charging infrastructure, and of course then a compelling reason from the government to compel demand for those electric vehicles.
OK, let's come on and talk about tariffs. Obviously, the other big story of the last couple of weeks, Stellantis share prices take a little bit of a hammering, unsurprisingly, as of other car manufacturers. Are you worried now that tariffs could be imposed on European car manufacturers?
Now, for me, here in the UK, of course, most of the vehicles that we sell are either built here in the UK and sold in the UK, or are manufactured in Europe. So it's, for my personal role, has less of an impact. Of course, from a Stellantis position overall, we would be in favour of free trade. We operate globally. And so outside of what's happening in America, no impact for us here in the UK right now. But let's see and hope for some consistency in approach.
So just finding that's interesting. So you're saying, if President Trump imposes tariffs on the European Union, or indeed here in the UK, you feel, as the MD here in the UK, that actually it shouldn't really affect your business or indeed consumers at all?
Well, consumers in the UK, of course, there's a completely different subject matter in terms of our American business, but I can only represent the views of our business in the UK. And we build here locally and sell here locally, and we will import from majority of the other cars that we sell here from the European Union. And so we don't have a situation where, in the UK at least, we're exposed to those tariffs right now.
Okay. That's good news, of course, for your workers. Thank you very much indeed, Ulrich Druce there, who is the Managing Director of Stellantis UK. And of course, you may have seen, they are, of course, the company that owns Vauxhall in that interview. Okay, you're watching Business Live here on Sky News. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, we'll be looking at how the market's doing. FTSE down a little today. All the details after this break.
We've come to one of Moscow's Cold War bunkers. It was built as a top-secret command centre.
Being here really feels like you're stepping back in time. I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
A show of military might and menace.
Courage, bravery and sacrifice will win the day.
It's a new subject. They'll learn about combat drones and some how to handle a Kalashnikov.
The Kremlin continues to put forward its own version of events, both present and past.
There's no mention of the fact that Russia invaded its neighbour. That's rewriting history, isn't it?
Now we have to read it carefully.
Vladimir Putin put forward his plan for a ceasefire in Ukraine, telling Kiev, pull out of your eastern territories and the war will end. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Vladimir Putin is already the Kremlin's longest-serving leader since Stalin. The question is, what will a fifth Putin term mean for Russia and the world?
Why do you support Vladimir Putin, Mr. Segal?
I can't answer questions that stupid.
I've watched Vladimir Putin attempt to create a new world order.
The St. Petersburg Economic Forum was the backdrop to Vladimir Putin's latest verbal volley that Russia could send missiles to other nations to target the West.
Ambassador, I wonder, shall we have a quick word for Sky News?
Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine?
Swedish media, oh my God, you're not afraid of being here.
American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display.
Russia says Evan Gershkovich was caught red-handed, but has never produced any evidence to back that up. Sky News. Get the full story first.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
I just took a shower above the clouds. You know why? Because this is the Emirates A380. Flying units fly better. Thank you.
Very welcome back. Let's have a look at how the market's doing in a bit more detail now. Let's speak to Kathleen Brooks, Research Director at XTB. A very good morning to you. And there is concern, isn't there? And we've been talking about this actually over the last month or so, the so-called yellow flags about the US economy. And they've continued this idea that actually the US is looking a bit more precarious in terms of economic growth.
Absolutely. Last year, it was, US exceptionalism was a real key theme that drove financial markets. Well, US stock markets have lost momentum at the same time as the US economy has lost momentum. Economic data has been surprising on the downside. Now, that's not not unexpected really, because it's just done so well. There's been so much outperformance in the US, but I think some economic slowdown, even before we get to see the impact of Trump's economic policies, that's having a big impact, and it's being felt in US markets right now.
And we're talking about lots of things here, aren't we? We're talking about consumer confidence, consumer sales. We're talking about actually a tighter jobs market. You know, there's a lot of flashing lights, if you like.
Yeah, there really is. I mean, a lot of it is to do with economic policy uncertainty. We don't know what the economic impact will be from Trump's tariffs and his other economic policies. Tariffs have been the linchpin so far. They could be inflationary at the same time as the US economy is slowing down. We know that economic policy uncertainty has weighed on consumer confidence, which has fallen to multi-year lows in the US. But we're also seeing some of the real economic data come in. Now, tomorrow, we're going to get their jobs data, and that will be really critical to see if this weakness in confidence is that businesses aren't hiring. And if that happens, it'll be really interesting to see what Donald Trump does, because he does like to have a strong economy. He likes America to be on top. It's not at the moment. So will he scale back on some of his economic rhetoric if the economy fails? We'll have to see.
Yeah, fascinating, and what impact this could have, as you say, on the politics in the White House too. Let's talk about Germany. Its borrowing costs have climbed after that decision, or the expectation of a decision on changing its constitution. This is around the debt brake and defence spending. And it's also having an impact, isn't it, in terms of borrowing costs for the Eurozone and Japan too?
Yeah, it's having a real global impact. Where it isn't actually is the US. But yes, UK borrowing costs are rising, but it's very much being felt in Europe. I mean, it's been a sea change in European borrowing costs. German bond yields rose by 30 basis points yesterday. That's the most since reunification. So we don't see moves on this scale. We didn't even see moves on this scale in the debt crisis. So it is a big change. Germany unleashing, its seismic fiscal shift for Germany, and it's reverberating around markets. But I think you're looking at, the global impact. Well, Japan is rising. Australia has seen their bond yields rise this morning as well. Germany and Japan aren't dissimilar. They're both industrial economies with an aging population. Yeah. So I think it's normal to see whatever Germany's doing, then it's reflected in Japan as well. Okay. And I think that for now, it's certainly not panic mode. German stocks have done very, very well. And this is just a real readjustment process. But it certainly makes the ECB meeting later today really interesting. German yields are hovering around that 3% level, which is the highest level for quite some time. But it's the speed of the move that's taken it. So yes, they're going to be spending more, but that government spending has got a lot more expensive in the last 24 hours. So it'll be interesting to see how the ECB discusses that later today.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We're seeing currently on your screen in Brussels this EU meeting about to get underway. You've got Ursula von der Leyen there, the EU Commission President, Antonio Costa, the EU Council President, Roberta Metsola, the President of the European Parliament, along with other EU leaders. And this is interesting too, because we're just talking about the debt ceilings or the debt brake for Germany and defence spending. And I'm just reading actually on the wires, Croatia's talking about allocating more money for defence. This is happening at a national level. Interestingly, today, they're also talking about doing more at an EU level. And that has its pressures too.
Yeah, it really does. I think you're right, that it's a massive fiscal spending boom in Europe. Who would have thought it would be Germany that would be leading this? But there we go. Things have changed so much. I mean, it's worth noting that Friedrich Merz has touted this. He's not Chancellor yet, but I think there is definitely a collective view within the EU that we can't rely on America. We've got to fund ourselves. We are going to be EU for the Europeans, and we're going to be, having to spend our own money on defence. So it's going to be a real sea change, not just for Germany, but what are they going to prioritise fiscally? Will they prioritise welfare states, or is part of the welfare state having a safe and secure state? And I think that they'll probably see the latter. They're going to boost defence spending. That could have an economic impact. But it's worth saying this has happened very, very quickly. Europe is working together, and they've got to prove that they can continue to do that to make sure that this money is spent well and that it has a positive economic impact down the line. Otherwise, it's just really expensive fiscal policy that could have economic ramifications in the future.
OK, Kathleen, great stuff as always. Thank you very much indeed. That's Kathleen Brooks there. As that EU summit gets underway in Brussels, just a couple of lines actually emerging via Reuters from the Kremlin. Well, the Russian Foreign Ministry actually saying that the France-British initiative, assume this means troops on the ground in Ukraine, is an attempt to buy time for Kyiv and prevent its military collapse. With them going on to say that Russia says it needs firm and final settlement on Ukraine, not a pause that will allow the West to use to rearm Ukraine. So interesting there that the Russian Foreign Ministry, unsurprisingly, pouring cold water on a possible France-UK deal around troops on the ground. You're watching Sky News. We'll have continued coverage of the summit getting underway in Brussels, with President Zelensky attending in person too. Up next with Kamali at the top of the hour. Do stay tuned.